The moment the power goes out, the danger does not arrive all at once. It spreads silently, temperature by temperature, hour by hour, through walls, floors, and bodies. In summer, heat begins to pool inside sealed rooms like a rising tide you cannot see, and in winter, cold starts stealing energy from your skin faster than your muscles can generate it. Most people believe exposure is dramatic, obvious, something that happens only outdoors or after days of neglect. That belief is why blackouts kill. Not because electricity is gone, but because the systems that quietly stabilized human survival for decades suddenly stop working, and the body is left negotiating directly with physics again. In that moment, your house is no longer shelter by default. It becomes an experiment in heat transfer, moisture balance, and metabolic limits, whether you understand or not. The danger begins with a simple fact that is rarely stated clearly. The human body is a heat engine with extremely narrow operating tolerances. At rest, it produces roughly the heat output of a small light bulb, and under stress it can generate many times that, but only if fuel, oxygen, and hydration are available. In a blackout, the environment stops assisting this process. Air conditioning halts, circulation fans die, furnaces and boilers go silent, and even modern, efficient, buildings reveal their dependency on powered systems to manage heat flow. Without intervention, interior temperatures drift toward exterior conditions, but not smoothly. They overshoot, they trap, they stratify. Heat accumulates at ceilings, cold pools near floors, and the human body, designed to regulate itself within a narrow band, is forced to compensate using sweat or shivering, both of which are metabolically expensive and finite. Most people misunderstand exposure as a binary event, something that happens when you are too hot or too cold. The hidden reality is that exposure is cumulative and often invisible until critical thresholds are crossed. Heat exhaustion and hypothermia do not require extreme weather. They require imbalance over time. In a blackout heatwave, dehydration accelerates core temperature rise because sweat becomes less effective without adequate fluid and electrolytes. In cold conditions, even mild drafts increase convective heat loss, forcing the body to burn stored energy at a rate most people are unprepared for. The danger is not the temperature itself, but the rate at which your body is losing or gaining heat relative to its ability to correct that loss. The overlooked science lies in heat transfer modes: conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. Buildings are designed to manage these using powered systems, but when power disappears, those same design choices can work against you. Large windows radiate heat outward at night in winter and inward during the day in summer. Concrete and brick act as thermal mass, absorbing heat slowly and releasing it just as slowly, which can be life-saving or lethal depending on timing. Insulation delays temperature change but does not prevent it, meaning a well-insulated home can become an oven during prolonged heat or a refrigerator during extended cold if no active management occurs. Understanding this transforms survival from guesswork into controlled adaptation. Evidence from real blackout events shows a consistent pattern. During extended summer outages, mortality spikes not only among the elderly but among otherwise healthy adults who underestimate indoor heat. Core body temperatures rise quietly during sleep, when behavioral defenses like drinking water or changing position stop. In winter blackouts, deaths often occur indoors from hypothermia, even when exterior temperatures are only moderately cold, because damp air, inactivity, and poor layering strip heat faster than expected. Emergency response data repeatedly shows that people die not because conditions were extreme, but because they did not intervene early enough. The survival implication is severe and immediate. Exposure management must begin the moment power fails, not hours later when discomfort becomes obvious. Waiting until you feel hot or cold means you are already behind. The body's warning systems lag behind thermal damage. By the time you feel chills or dizziness, your core temperature has already drifted into dangerous territory. Effective survival requires preemptive control of microclimates, hydration strategy, metabolic pacing, and shelter modification using passive methods that most people never learn because electricity made them unnecessary. As the blackout continues, conditions escalate. Daytime heat loads buildings with thermal energy that releases slowly at night, preventing recovery. Cold nights drain energy reserves faster than daytime sun can replenish them indoors. Humidity compounds both extremes, impairing evaporation in heat and increasing conductive loss in cold. Sleep deprivation follows, further reducing the body's ability to regulate temperature. This is the phase where mistakes multiply, where people open windows at the wrong time, burn fuel inefficiently, or exhaust themselves trying to fix the problem instead of stabilizing it. The difference between survival and collapse narrows to minutes of understanding versus hours of confusion. What comes next is not about comfort, but about control. Control of airflow without power, control of radiant surfaces, control of moisture, and control of your own energy output. These principles are not intuitive, and they are rarely taught, because modern life outsourced them to machines. In a blackout, you either rediscover them quickly, or you become another data point in a post-event report explaining how ordinary environments turn deadly. The next layer of danger reveals itself when people attempt instinctive fixes that actually accelerate exposure. Opening windows during extreme heat feels logical, yet if exterior air is hotter or more humid than the interior, convection reverses and heat floods inward. In cold conditions, sealing every opening feels safe, but stagnant air increases humidity from breathing and sweating, making heat loss faster through damp clothing and skin. These reactions are driven by comfort instincts, not by thermodynamics. The blackout strips away automation, forcing humans to interact directly with heat flow, and most people have never been trained to do this deliberately. To understand how to survive, you must analyze the environment as a system rather than a room. Temperature alone is not the enemy. The real threat is heat flux, the movement of energy across boundaries. Your body constantly exchanges heat with surrounding surfaces. Sit on a cold floor and conductive loss pulls warmth from your core faster than air temperature suggests. Stand near a sunlit wall during a blackout heatwave and radiant heat adds load even if the air feels tolerable. In both cases, the body responds by sweating or shivering, which increases fluid loss or calorie consumption. This creates a feedback loop where physiological resources drain faster than they can be replenished. The common misunderstanding is that insulation is only about keeping heat in during winter and out during summer. In reality, insulation slows change, but without active systems it can trap danger. During a prolonged heat event, a sealed, insulated space absorbs solar and metabolic heat and holds it. At night, when exterior temperatures drop, that same insulation prevents heat from escaping, locking occupants into elevated temperatures for hours. In cold events, insulation buys time, but once interior temperatures drop, rewarming becomes exponentially harder because the structure no longer contributes stored heat. People expect insulation to save them indefinitely. It does not. It only delays consequences. The hidden science here is thermal inertia and time lag. Buildings do not respond instantly to environmental changes. Heavy materials like concrete, brick, and stone absorb energy slowly and release it slowly. Light structures respond quickly but lose stability faster. This means survival strategies must be timed, not static. Ventilation is not on or off. It is used strategically during temperature differentials. Shading is not aesthetic. It is a radiation control tool. Floor contact is not neutral, it is a conductive pathway. Even clothing choices change heat exchange by altering air layers trapped near the skin. Evidence from emergency shelter studies shows that people who manage exposure successfully do not fight the environment, they shape it. In heat, they reduce radiant input during the day and maximize convective and radiant loss at night. In cold, they minimize convective loss and increase radiant gain whenever possible. They move less, not more, to conserve energy. They hydrate with intention rather than reacting to thirst, because dehydration reduces blood volume and impairs heat dissipation, increasing the risk of heat injury even in moderate temperatures. The survival implications become more complex as blackout duration extends beyond the first day. Food intake drops, either because refrigeration fails or appetite declines under stress. This reduces metabolic heat production in cold environments and impairs sweat production in heat due to electrolyte imbalance. Sleep becomes fragmented, which disrupts hormonal regulation of temperature. Cortisol rises, increasing fluid loss and altering blood flow. The body's ability to self-regulate weakens just as environmental stress increases. This is why exposure deaths often occur on the second or third day, not the first. Escalation occurs when people attempt to generate heat or cooling without understanding secondary effects. Burning fuel indoors without ventilation increases carbon monoxide risk and humidity, worsening cold stress. Overexertion during heat to fix the environment spikes core temperature and accelerates collapse. Improvised solutions fail because they address symptoms, not energy balance. The correct approach is counterintuitive. Reduce gradients, slow exchange, and align human activity with thermal cycles instead of resisting them. As conditions degrade, the blackout forces a return to primitive but precise principles. Shelter becomes about layers of control rather than a single barrier. Your immediate microclimate, the air within inches of your skin, matters more than the room temperature. Body positioning, surface contact, and even posture influence heat loss and gain. Small adjustments compound over hours into survival margins. Ignore them, and no amount of willpower compensates. The transition now moves inward, from the structure to the body itself. Once environmental controls are limited, physiology becomes the final defense. Understanding how the human body prioritizes heat distribution, how blood flow shifts under stress, and how hydration and nutrition directly influence thermal regulation is not optional knowledge. It is the difference between enduring a blackout and being overwhelmed by it. When environmental controls fail, the body becomes both the battlefield and the tool. This is where most people lose ground without realizing it. Human thermoregulation is not a simple thermostat, it is a hierarchy of compromises. Blood flow is redirected away from extremities to protect vital organs in cold, and toward the skin in heat to shed energy. These shifts are not free. Reduced blood flow to hands and feet increases dexterity loss and injury risk in cold, while increased skin blood flow in heat reduces central blood pressure, increasing dizziness and collapse risk. In a blackout, when medical assistance is delayed or non-existent, even minor physiological errors compound into fatal outcomes. The danger intensifies because people trust sensation over measurement. Feeling, not too cold, or, not that hot, is misleading. Peripheral nerves adapt quickly, dulling discomfort even as core temperature drifts. In cold exposure, numbness replaces pain, creating a false sense of stability while core heat continues to drop. In heat exposure, sweating can mask rising core temperature until dehydration reduces sweat output, at which point heat stroke can develop rapidly. The body does not announce failure loudly. It whispers until it cannot speak at all. The analysis must focus on energy balance. In cold conditions, every calorie becomes heat potential. Shivering can increase metabolic output several times over resting levels, but it consumes glycogen rapidly. Once glycogen is depleted, shivering weakens, even if the body is still cold. Fat stores provide longer-term energy, but mobilizing them requires time and adequate hydration. In a blackout winter scenario, undereating is not merely uncomfortable, it directly reduces your ability to maintain core temperature. Conversely, in heat, digestion itself produces metabolic heat. Large meals increase internal heat load, raising core temperature when dissipation mechanisms are already strained. Timing and composition of food intake become thermal tools, not just nutritional choices. The common misunderstanding is that clothing alone determines warmth or cooling. Clothing matters, but its function is often misinterpreted. In cold, tight clothing compresses insulating air layers, increasing heat loss. In heat, overly loose clothing can trap humid air, reducing evaporative cooling. The hidden science is boundary layers. A thin layer of still air near the skin acts as insulation in cold and is a controlled evaporation zone in heat. The goal is not maximum insulation or maximum airflow, but optimized exchange. This is why experienced survival practitioners adjust layers frequently instead of setting them once. Evidence from occupational physiology, including studies on miners, soldiers, and disaster responders, shows that small changes in posture and activity dramatically affect heat balance. Sitting directly on cold ground increases conductive loss far more than standing, because contact area increases in blood pools in compressed tissues. Lying flat in heat increases radiant absorption from surfaces below and above. Curling slightly in cold reduces exposed surface area, while spreading out in heat increases it. These are not comfort preferences, they are geometric controls over heat transfer. Survival implications deepen when hydration is considered. Water is not only for preventing thirst, it is the medium through which heat is transported within the body. Blood plasma volume determines how effectively heat can be moved from core to skin in heat and how efficiently nutrients reach muscles in cold. Dehydration thickens blood, reducing circulation efficiency and increasing cardiovascular strain. In cold, dehydration accelerates hypothermia by impairing shivering efficiency. In heat, it accelerates hyperthermia by limiting sweat production. The blackout removes easy access to chilled or heated water, making disciplined intake critical even when appetite and thirst cues are unreliable. Escalation occurs when stress hormones enter the equation. Adrenaline and cortisol rise during prolonged outages, increasing heart rate and metabolic heat production. In heat, this adds load the body must shed. In cold, it initially helps generate warmth but rapidly depletes energy reserves. Sleep deprivation magnifies these effects, disrupting circadian regulation of body temperature. Normally, core temperature drops slightly at night to facilitate sleep. In heat blackouts, it may not drop at all. In cold blackouts, it may drop too far. Both scenarios increase mortality risk during rest, when monitoring and corrective behaviors stop. The transition now moves from individual physiology back to the environment, but at a smaller scale. If the entire building cannot be controlled, a micro-shelter must be created. This is where overlooked principles become decisive. A single room can be thermally isolated using passive barriers, reducing the volume of air that must be managed. In cold, concentrating heat production and insulation in a smaller space increases survivability. In heat, isolating the coolest space and protecting it from radiation preserves a thermal refuge. People often attempt to maintain the whole structure and fail. Survivors narrow the problem until it becomes solvable. What follows is the most dangerous psychological shift. As conditions worsen, people oscillate between frantic action and exhausted inertia. Both are harmful. Excessive movement increases heat production in heat and energy loss in cold. Complete stillness leads to circulatory stagnation and rapid cooling in cold or impaired heat shedding in heat. The optimal state is controlled, minimal movement aligned with environmental cycles. This requires discipline and understanding, not instinct. The blackout does not kill by drama. It kills by attrition, by small miscalculations repeated over hours and days. Heat and cold are not enemies to be fought aggressively. They are forces to be managed precisely. The next phase pushes beyond individual and indoor survival into decision-making under prolonged exposure, where when to move, when to stay, and when to seek external shelter becomes critical. As exposure lengthens, the most dangerous errors are no longer physical but cognitive. Decision-making degrades quietly under thermal stress. Even mild hyperthermia reduces attention span, working memory, and risk assessment. Mild hypothermia does the same, slowing thought, narrowing focus, and increasing fatalistic thinking. People begin to misjudge time, overestimate their physical capacity, and underestimate environmental risks. In blackouts, many fatalities occur not because shelter was impossible, but because people made one final, unnecessary decision to move, to fix, or to just step outside, unaware that their judgment had already been compromised by temperature stress. The danger here is that exposure undermines the very mental tools needed to escape it. Heat causes cerebral blood flow changes that impair executive function. Cold reduces nerve conduction velocity, slowing reaction time and increasing error rates. These effects begin well before clinical heat stroke or hypothermia. The body sacrifices cognitive sharpness to preserve core organs, and the mind becomes an unreliable narrator of its own condition. This is why relying on how you feel is one of the most dangerous strategies during a blackout. Analysis of disaster response reports show a consistent pattern. Individuals who set clear thermal rules early survive at higher rates. Rules such as limiting activity during peak heat, enforcing hydration schedules regardless of thirst, or maintaining minimum caloric intake despite stress prevent cognitive drift. Those who improvise continuously burn mental energy and make progressively worse decisions. The blackout punishes improvisation and rewards pre-commitment to thermally rational behavior. A widespread misunderstanding is that evacuation is always safer than sheltering. In reality, movement dramatically increases heat exchange. Walking in heat multiplies metabolic heat production, overwhelming already stressed cooling mechanisms. Walking in cold strips heat through convection and sweat evaporation, even in dry air. Many blackout deaths occur during attempted relocation to perceived safer locations, where distance, weather, and physical strain combine into lethal exposure. Staying put in a controlled microenvironment often carries far lower risk, especially when external conditions are extreme. The hidden science lies in exposure budgets. Every human has a finite tolerance for heat gain and heat loss per unit time. Movement spends that budget rapidly. Rest spends it slowly. This is why emergency management emphasizes shelter in place during temperature extremes. The physics is unforgiving. Once the budget is exceeded, recovery becomes exponentially harder, even if conditions improve later. People who collapse from heat often do so hours after exertion, when internal damage continues despite rest. Those who become hypothermic may continue to lose heat after movement stops due to wet clothing and depleted energy reserves. Evidence from military survival research demonstrates that successful exposure management depends on synchronization. Activity is aligned with the coolest part of the day in heat and the warmest part in cold. Hydration and nutrition are timed to support these cycles. In heat, cooling strategies focus on maximizing evaporation when humidity is lowest. In cold, insulation strategies focus on minimizing convective loss during wind exposure. These are not comfort preferences, they are survival algorithms refined through hard data. Survival implications become stark when resources dwindle. Without power, water supply may become limited or contaminated, forcing rationing. Rationing water in heat is often fatal, yet people do it instinctively to save supplies. The reality is that dehydration accelerates collapse faster than water scarcity alone. In cold, rationing food reduces heat production, increasing hypothermia risk. The correct strategy is not uniform rationing, but prioritized consumption aligned with thermal stress. This runs counter to intuition and is rarely understood until it is too late. Escalation continues as social dynamics enter the equation. In shared spaces, disagreements over ventilation, movement, and resource use create conflict. Stress hormones rise, cooperation falls, and thermal mismanagement accelerates. Groups that survive establish thermal authority early, basing decisions on conditions rather than comfort complaints. Groups that argue fragment their strategy and expose themselves to compounding risks. The transition now moves toward thresholds. There is a point in every blackout where conditions cross from uncomfortable to dangerous to irreversible. The tragedy is that this threshold is invisible. Core temperature can drift only a few degrees before organ systems begin to fail. Once that line is crossed, no amount of motivation can restore balance without external intervention. Understanding where that line lies, and acting before it is reached, is the central lesson of exposure survival. What remains to be addressed is the final layer: long-duration blackout exposure, where days turn into weeks, and temporary strategies fail. At that stage, Survival depends on restructuring daily life around thermal reality rather than resisting it. This requires abandoning modern assumptions about comfort, productivity, and normalcy, and replacing them with ancient but precise principles of heat management. That is where most people break, and where the final difference between survival and collapse is decided.